The U.S. will back Ukraine as much as needed in its battle against Russia. This from U.S. President Joe Biden in a surprise visit to Kyiv ahead of the first anniversary of Moscow's invasion. The UN Security Council has met over the recent North Korean missile provocations but couldn't reach a consensus due to opposition from China and Russia. A 6.4 magnitude earthquake has already stricken Türkiye, leaving 3 people dead and hundreds injured. We begin in Ukraine this morning. U.S. President Joe Biden made a surprise visit to the country ahead of the one-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He said Washington will back Ukraine as much as is needed. Our Song Yoo-jin reports.
A surprise visit by U.S. President Joe Biden to Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. Monday's historic trip marks Biden's first visit to the country since war broke out last February. It also comes 2 months after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky traveled to the U.S. to meet him in person. Biden arrived in Ukraine's capital on Monday morning and was greeted by Zelensky at the Mariinsky Palace. Air raid sirens blared as the two leaders walked through central Kyiv. While giving joint remarks to reporters while standing side by side, Biden reiterated Washington's unwavering support for Kyiv.
1 year later, freedom is priceless. It's worth fighting for as long as it takes, and that's how long we're going to be with you, Mr. President, for as long as it takes.
We'll do it.
Thank you.
Biden also promised an additional $500 million worth of military assistance to the war-torn country. The new aid package includes more military equipment such as artillery ammunition, howitzers, anti-armor systems, and air surveillance radars. Biden added that the U.S. will announce fresh sanctions later this week against Russian elites and companies who try to evade existing sanctions in order to boost Russia's war efforts. Biden's Ukraine visit was tightly kept secret until the last moment, although a trip to neighboring Poland was his agenda for this week. After departing Kyiv in the early afternoon, the president arrived in Poland Monday evening to begin a 2-day visit. There, he plans to meet Polish President Andrzej Duda and hold talks with the leaders of NATO's 9 eastern flank nations. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
The emergency meeting of the UN Security Council called for action against the recent North Korean missile provocations, but failed to reach a conclusion due to opposition from China and Russia. Monday's open meeting followed a request from Japan after the North also launched 2 short-range ballistic missiles into the East Sea on Monday. Washington and Tokyo called for more sanctions against the North, while U.S. Ambassador to the UN Linda Thomas-Greenfield slammed China and Russia for blocking the measures. Last year, the UNSC moved to impose fresh sanctions on Pyongyang but was vetoed by both Beijing and Moscow. Following North Korea's missile provocations on Monday, Seoul's foreign ministry slapped additional sanctions on individuals and institutions involved in developing the regime's nuclear and missile programs. Our Lee In-jin reports.
On Monday, the South Korean Foreign Ministry announced independent sanctions on North Korea, the 4th round under the Yoon administration. The latest sanctions target 4 individuals and 5 entities linked to Pyongyang's weapons programs. Those blacklisted include Lee Sung-un for negotiating trade deals involving weapons and luxury goods, Kim Soo-il for engaging in trade activity that has earned foreign currency for the North Korean regime, Lee Seok for transporting electronic components from China to North Korea for use in rocket development, and Vladlen Amchantsev, a Russian-born South African national who has helped North Korea buy oil illegally. The 5 institutions, including 2 Singaporean shipping firms, have either been involved in dodging maritime sanctions or trading North Korean coal and exporting oil into the regime. The sanctions are a response to a series of events, which include comments on Friday from the North's foreign ministry, which warned that South Korea and the United States would face unprecedentedly persistent and strong counteractions should the 2 countries go ahead with planned military exercises, with one slated for Wednesday. North Korea followed the threats by firing a Hwasong-15 intercontinental ballistic missile on Saturday, which, according to the state-run Korean Central News Agency, was organized suddenly without prior notice. On Sunday, South Korea and the U.S. staged unscheduled combined air drills. Then on Monday morning, according to South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff, North Korea fired a pair of short-range ballistic missiles off its east coast. 이은진, Arirang News.
2 weeks after the devastating Türkiye-Syria earthquake, another magnitude 6.4 earthquake slammed the same regions of both countries, killing at least 3 people and leaving hundreds injured. Lee Seung-jae with the latest.
With thousands of aftershocks being reported after the massive earthquakes that struck southeastern Turkey and northwestern Syria on February 6, concerns remained over the possibility of another big quake in the area. That fear became a reality on Monday when a magnitude 6.4 earthquake struck the same regions, leaving at least 3 dead and hundreds of others injured. The latest aftershock was centered in Turkey's Hatay province, where a rescue operation is underway. For many of those that are still coping with the aftermath of the initial earthquakes 2 weeks ago, even the slightest tremor has them leaving their homes.
Same fear, the same feeling of unease. We cannot enter. If we do, we cannot stay. We don't know what to do. God have mercy on us. There is nothing to say.
No deaths as a result of the most recent earthquake have been reported in Syria, although over 100 people were said to have been injured. The earthquake has resulted in power outages and disrupted telephone and internet services in the affected regions of the two countries. According to Reuters, the earthquake was felt as far away as Egypt and Lebanon. Meanwhile, with operations focused more on the survivors of the earthquake, authorities say more than 1 million people have been left homeless since the February 6 earthquakes. The death toll from those quakes has also surpassed 47,000 people. Experts also say that aftershocks could last from months to years. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Now, the earthquakes in Turkey came at a time when its economy is already on the edge. Rebuilding the destroyed infrastructure there is expected to cost tens of billions of dollars. Our Kim Hyun-sung fills you in.
After the devastating earthquakes, Turkey now has to deal with the economic aftershocks. The damage from the recent earthquakes may cost close to $84 billion. That's close to a tenth of Turkey's GDP last year. The earthquake will also have a knock-on effect on the country's agricultural, construction, and tourism sectors. The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development says the earthquakes could set back Turkey's GDP this year by 1%. Some of the damage is slightly harder to measure.
Their work relationships have been destroyed, which means that there is going to be also in the short term this loss of productive capacity. These people are not going to be working where they used to work. So there will be this opportunity cost that the country is going to suffer from.
The quakes came at a fragile time for the Turkish economy. According to the professor, the country's heavy inflationary pressures and high interest rates had pushed many down the socioeconomic ladder. Now, with government spending pooled into repairing the damage, the situation may get worse.
On the fiscal side, we see the government, having these big plans of, rebuilding these cities and investing into these cities. So that's going to create more fiscal pressure on the inflation that might exacerbate the conditions.
The earthquakes may also change Turkish political discourse. Elections are coming up this May, with incumbent President Recep Tayyip Erdogan under heat for the government's disaster response. Some from his party have voiced to push the election dates back a month in the wake of the earthquake, possibly hinting their unease at their chances of winning another term. As for now, the elections will stay as scheduled for May 14th. But the memory of one of the most disastrous events in the country's recent history will most likely remain in the voters' memories as they cast their ballots. And whoever wins the race will face many challenges at this critical time for the Turkish economy. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
The so-called surveillance balloons from China reportedly had a world tour crossing over 40 countries across 5 continents. We clearly know the list includes the U.S. Then, how much of a threat are these kinds of surveillance objects? For more, we're joined by Mr. Bruce Klinger. He's a senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Good morning. No suspected surveillance balloon has been spotted here in South Korea yet, but there is speculation that the so-called Chinese spy balloons could have crossed into South Korean airspace. How likely is that scenario?
I think it's very likely. We're really just discovering this phenomena, and after the balloon was discovered flying over the entirety of the United States, when the military went back, they discovered a lot of Chinese balloons had flown over parts of the U.S. before, as well as, I'm sure, many other nations. Now, they're also discovering that there are many other private balloons, weather balloons, et cetera, that they would have to distinguish these spy satellites or spy balloons from.
Right, then the question is, how can we distinguish flying objects for commercial purposes from those actually used for surveillance purposes? How can we know the difference?
Well, I think it's going to be difficult, just as South Korea has found identifying and distinguishing drones very difficult.
Right.
So it's seemingly a new threat, although really quite historical. People have been using balloons for reconnaissance for quite some time. So, but it is something we're going to have to not only identify, but also take measures against, but then also have to weigh the costs of doing so. When the U.S. shot down a balloon, it was using a $1 million or so, or hundreds of thousands of dollars missile for what could have been a very cheap balloon. So it's in a way, a new threat for the military that they have to assess and then rank against all the other really more serious threats.
Right. And it's even more challenging when they're really far away because they really look like commercial balloons from far away.
Right. Well, and certainly China has reconnaissance satellites, so they would be using that to monitor South Korea. North Korea not having that same capability. So one might think that North Korea might be more likely to use balloons to try to gain reconnaissance over South Korea.
Right. And when suspected flying surveillance objects are detected in South Korean airspace, for instance, then what measures are taken or should be taken? I mean, should they be shut down immediately, just like the U.S. did?
Well, in the United States, we'd have to have the military coordinating with the Federal Aviation Administration, determining what the civilian authorities knew about what balloons are there. But balloons can just go up by private organizations, hobby groups, et cetera. So it's something that the South Korean government will have to coordinate not only between the military, but also civilian authorities to try to identify what is flying over South Korea, and then whether it can be reached by missiles on airplanes. Airplanes can only operate at a certain altitude. And then also you have to think in terms of shooting it down, what would be the impact on the ground, perhaps threatening civilians when the target lands perhaps on a populated area.
Right. Now, before we let you go, Mr. Klinger, do you think South Korea should be concerned of those spy balloons?
Well, I think they have to be concerned, but also knowing that China is already surveilling South Korea with spy satellites. So this if it's happening, would just be adding another layer of surveillance.
Right. Balloons emerging as new challenges and also a threat. We have to keep a close eye on that.
Right. And it's something that the military has to weigh against the North Korean threat, where obviously that's a much more existential threat.
Exactly. Coming in drones now. That's also the latest.
Right.
All right. Thank you so much for your insight today.
감사합니다.
South Korean thriller movie Unlocked is currently number 2 on Netflix worldwide. According to the streaming rating website Flix Patrol on Monday, the Unlocked remained at number 2 on the global movies chart for the second consecutive day after it hit the spot just 2 days after its release. The movie is number 1 in places like South Korea, Vietnam, Singapore, and Indonesia. The movie tells the story of a woman whose life is turned upside down as a hacker gets hold of her lost cell phone and uses it to track her. After the pandemic years, South Korea's hot shopping spot Myeongdong is welcoming new tourists with various eateries that satisfies the visitors' taste buds. Our Lee Soo-jin has the story.
The shopping area of Myeongdong in central Seoul was hit especially hard by the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting drop in tourists from China. Chinese tourists made up nearly 34% of all tourists to Myeongdong in 2019, but their numbers fell sharply to 3.3% last year. Tourists from other parts of the world are now filling the void. The proportion of travelers from Southeast Asia, for instance, more than doubled from 13.1% to nearly 27% over the same period. Shops and restaurants in the area are adapting to their new customers. Behind me, you can see signs that have been translated, and you can also hear street vendors calling out in languages from all over the world. Many shops also show the halal certification mark, which ensures that the product is safe for Muslims to consume.
As a tourist, I feel like I can try more of Korean food, not just typical halal food that you...
Restaurants selling Korean food have also diversified their menus so that visitors with certain dietary requirements can try traditional Korean cuisine. One such restaurant is Hangaram, a restaurant run by a traditional Korean food expert.
Since foreigners from all over the world come, we have decided to cater to their dietary needs. We created a harmony between certified halal food and traditional Korean food, and we also offer vegan options.
Coming from the U.S., there's a lot of Korean restaurants also in the U.S., but it's very rare to find like very traditional type of food. My mom, she likes to eat a little bit more like vegetarian, less. So we did have like an option for that.
With the influx of new tourists, the district is beginning to regain its vigor from before the pandemic. The vacancy rate of Myeongdong's small-sized properties had been as high as 50.3% in the fourth quarter of 2021, but has recovered to the point where by the fourth quarter of last year, just 21.5% of small properties stood vacant. However, experts say that more needs to be done for the area to fully recover.
If the economy continues to improve and tourists keep coming, Myeongdong will survive. But for vacancy rates to recover completely, it'll need to do something different.
The expert said this includes new initiatives such as creating more things for visitors to see and do. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
For a look at the news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley joining us here in the studio. Good morning, Matthew.
Good morning, Dami.
Let's start in Brazil. Dozens have been killed in the country's southeast following floods and landslides that tore through coastal towns. Tell us more.
Well, that's right, Dami. At least 36 people have been killed and hundreds have been displaced in Sao Paulo state since the weekend. Now, 35 of the deaths were in San Sebastião and one person died in the neighboring town of Ubatuba. But the death toll is expected to climb as rescuers attempt to find survivors trapped in some 50 buildings that have collapsed in the wake of the disaster. Now, the governor of Sao Paulo has declared a state of emergency in 5 of its hardest-hit coastal towns. According to officials in San Sebastião, the floods were triggered after the area saw a record 600 millimeters of rainfall in just 24 hours. Meanwhile, carnival events in affected areas have been cancelled. Now turning over to the United States, where one person has been killed and 4 injured in a shooting along the New Orleans iconic Mardi Gras parade route. Now the incident took place on Sunday night local time at the popular Krewe of Bacchus parade, a popular run-up festival to the Mardi Gras. According to authorities, the suspected shooter, who was armed with 2 guns, was taken into custody just moments after the shots were fired. It's still being determined whether another person was involved. The person killed was a teenage boy, while a 4-year-old girl was among the injured. The Mardi Gras festival is set to take place on Tuesday. Now staying in the United States, as a record number of guns were seized at airports across the country in 2022. The U.S. Transportation Security Administration says that last year, 6,542 guns were found at airport security checkpoints. Approximately 88% of these were loaded. It's the most guns seized in a single year and is an increase from the record 5,971 guns seized the previous year. Airport gun seizures have increased every year since 2010, with the exception of 2020, when COVID-19 restricted air travel. Now, passengers caught with guns mostly claim to have forgotten they were carrying a firearm. Guns can be taken onto planes, provided they are unloaded and placed in checked baggage. And finally, those suffering from paralysis due to a stroke could soon be able to regain some movement. Now, this is according to preliminary results of an innovative treatment published in Nature Medicine on Monday. Researchers from the University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon implanted electrodes along the spinal cords of 2 people. The implants sent electrical stimulation when they tried different activities. One of the patients managed to eat a steak without help for the first time in 9 years, while the other saw improvements in reaching out their arm. Although it's the first success in addressing such conditions in stroke patients, more research is needed.
Good morning. It was quite chilly all day yesterday with the sharp winds. Hope you didn't catch a cold from yesterday's sudden winter-like weather. And make sure to dress warmer this morning. Feels like temperatures in the capital are close to -10 degrees Celsius. Well, highs will go up slightly higher than yesterday, though, in the capital area. And along with sunny spells and cold wind, a dry weather advisory has been issued in Seoul, Gyeonggi-do, and east of Gangwon-do province this morning, so please drink plenty of water. Meanwhile, Jeju and the south coast are under strong wind advisories. Now, a sub-zero start for most regions. Afternoon highs in Seoul will top out at 4 degrees. Daegu topping out at 7 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Bright skies with normal to good air quality are in the forecast. A warm-up is on the way ahead of a mostly dry week. Then there will be a big warm-up for next week, taking us to double-digit afternoon highs in the capital region. With that in mind, here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
That wraps up today's A New Day at Arirang. Do stay with us for more updates throughout the day. Thanks for watching.